The fluorescent lights hummed their electric lullaby above the university library's main floor. As Lily Scott pushed her cart of returned books through the narrow aisles, her secondhand sneakers squeaking softly against the polished linoleum. The familiar scent of dust and old ink wrapped around her like an embrace, offering sanctuary from the cruelty that waited beyond these walls. "Look at her trying so hard." Madison's voice cut through the studious silence like broken glass. "Still here at 10 p.m. Doesn't she have anything better to do than play library assistant?" "I heard she's on the work-study program," whispered Chloe, her designer handbag clutched against her chest like armor. "Gets paid just so she can hide from the real world. How pathetic is that?" "Everything looks like a thrift store special," added Brittany with theatrical sympathy. "Does she own anything that wasn't someone else's first?" Lily's hands trembled as she shelved a worn copy of Emily Dickinson's collected works, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings like accusations. She kept her head down, focusing on the familiar rhythm of her work. Check call numbers, sort by section, return books to their proper homes. It was methodical, peaceful, a world where stories mattered more than social status. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching their table with a book they'd left behind. "You forgot this." Madison looked up with the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. "Oh, look, girls. The poor girl is trying to help us." "That's sweet," Chloe said, her voice dripping with false kindness. "I heard she gets needs-based assistance," Brittany whispered loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "Everything covered because her family can't afford basic necessities." Heat flooded Lily's cheeks as other students turned to stare. The truth in their words stung more than the cruelty. She did qualify for maximum financial aid, did work multiple jobs to cover expenses they took for granted, did shop exclusively at thrift stores because new clothes were a luxury her family couldn't afford. "I just thought you might want your book," Lily said quietly, setting the volume on their table with gentle precision. "We don't want anything that's been touched by someone who looks like they haven't seen soap in weeks," Madison replied, pushing the book away with obvious distaste. Scattered laughter rippled through the surrounding area as students abandoned their studies to witness the public humiliation. Lily felt every eye on her threadbare sweater, her carefully mended jeans, her shoes that had belonged to someone else before finding their way to her feet. "Some people just don't belong in places like this," Chloe added with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned her right to exist in any space she chose. Lily retreated to her cart, dignity intact despite the burning shame in her chest. She'd heard variations of this conversation dozens of times, whispered comments about the scholarship girl who worked while they partied, who studied while they socialized, who chose books over the social climbing that seemed to consume their every waking moment. "Don't let them poison your evening," said Professor Martin, appearing beside her cart with an armload of research materials. He'd witnessed the exchange from his nearby table, his expression mixing sympathy with something that might have been admiration. "It's okay," Lily replied automatically, though her voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. "No, it's not okay. You're one of the brightest students I've taught in 20 years, and you deserve better than casual cruelty from people who mistake privilege for worth." His words meant everything, but they couldn't erase the daily reality of navigating a world where her clothes marked her as different, where her work-study position made her visible only when others needed someone to diminish. "Thank you, Professor Martin. That means more than you know. Keep writing, Lily. Your voice matters, even when the world seems determined to convince you otherwise." As Professor Martin returned to his research, Lily continued her rounds, organizing returned books with the meticulous care she brought to everything in her life. The poetry section drew her like a magnet, volumes of Frost and Whitman, Plath and Oliver, voices that had sustained her through the loneliest nights of her childhood. The library began to empty as closing time approached, students abandoning their temporary academic pursuits for dormitory celebrations and weekend adventures Lily could only imagine. She moved through the quieting space like a guardian spirit, ensuring every book found its proper place, every reading area was restored to order. That was when she noticed him, a man in his early 30s, standing alone in the poetry section, his shoulders carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the hour. His clothes were rumpled but expensive, his hair disheveled, as if he'd been running hands through it in frustration. He reached toward the upper shelves with the uncertain movements of someone unfamiliar with library organization. Lily watched him struggle for several minutes, her natural instinct to help warring with hard-learned lessons about approaching strangers. But something in his posture, the slight slump of defeat, the way he'd pause and stare at books he couldn't quite reach, reminded her of herself during those first overwhelming weeks at university. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching with the quiet confidence that came from years of navigating library systems. "Can I help you find something specific?" He turned, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes that went deeper than physical fatigue. "I'm looking for a particular book of poetry," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. "Something that might remind me why words matter." Lily felt her heart constrict with recognition. She'd stood in this same section countless times, searching for voices that could articulate feelings she couldn't express, seeking connection across the centuries that separated her from poets who'd understood loneliness and hope in equal measure. "What kind of poetry speaks to you?" she asked gently. "Contemporary? Classic? Something specific you're trying to find?" "I don't know," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I used to read poetry constantly when I was younger. Carried books everywhere, memorized entire collections. But somewhere along the way, I lost that connection. Now, I'm hoping to find it again." Lily studied his face, noting the way his expression softened when he spoke about poetry, the hint of nostalgia that suggested this search was about more than casual reading. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the upper shelves. He stepped aside, and Lily reached for a slim volume bound in faded blue cloth. The book felt familiar in her hands, its pages soft with age and countless readings. "This one," she said, offering it with the same careful reverence she'd use for something sacred. "It saved me more than once." He accepted the book with hands that trembled slightly, reading the spine with growing wonder. "Pablo Neruda, 20 love poems and a song of despair. I haven't read this in 15 years. "It's beautiful," Lily said simply. "Passionate but heartbreaking. He writes about love like it's both salvation and destruction." "That's exactly right," he said, his voice carrying surprise and something deeper. "You understand poetry." "I understand longing," Lily corrected softly. "Poetry just gives it better words than I have." The man studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're very wise for someone so young." "I'm not that young, just poor enough that wisdom comes early." The honesty of her response seemed to startle him. "What's your name?" "Lily. Lily Scott. Thank you, Lily Scott, for the book and for reminding me that connection is still possible." "Reading saves us all eventually," she replied with a smile that came easier than it should have given the evening's earlier humiliation. As the man walked toward the checkout desk with Neruda's poetry clutched against his chest like armor, Lily felt the familiar warmth that came from helping someone find exactly what they needed. The next morning brought gray November skies and news that would ripple through the university's literature department like an earthquake. "Emergency department meeting," Professor Martin announced to his modern poetry seminar, his voice carrying barely contained excitement. "Fletcher Grant Literary Group is hosting a scholarship competition. Full ride plus publishing internship for one exceptional student." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs from her usual seat in the back row. Fletcher Grant Literary Group was legendary. They'd launched the careers of dozens of acclaimed poets and novelists, their imprint appearing on spines throughout the library where she spent her evenings. The competition requires an original poetry portfolio and a personal essay about literature's role in social change, Professor Martin continued. Applications are due in 2 weeks, with interviews the following week. Around the classroom, students erupted in excited whispers about their chances, their connections, their plans to leverage family relationships in the publishing world. "This is mine," Madison declared loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "My mother's college roommate works in their acquisitions department. This scholarship has my name written all over it." "What about the merit component?" asked David from the front row. "Don't they choose based on actual writing ability?" "Please," Chloe laughed dismissively. "Publishing is all about connections. They want someone who understands their world, who fits their image, not some charity case who thinks reading library books makes them a real writer." Lily felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up her neck. The message was clear. Opportunities like this belong to students with the right backgrounds, the right clothes, the right networks. Students like her were welcome to participate, but everyone understood the outcome was predetermined. "I encourage all of you to apply," Professor Martin said pointedly, his eyes finding Lily's across the room. "This competition is about talent and passion, not pedigree." After class, he approached her desk. "Lily, I hope you're planning to submit a portfolio." "I don't know," she replied quietly. "I'm not sure I'm what they're looking for." "You're exactly what they should be looking for. Your poetry has depth, authenticity, a voice that comes from genuine experience rather than academic exercise. But I don't have connections in publishing. I've never even met anyone who works in that world." Your words speak for themselves. Don't let other people's advantages become your limitations. That afternoon, Lily worked her shift at the campus bookstore, stocking shelves and processing orders while surrounded by books she couldn't afford to own. The Fletcher Grant Literary Group announcement played on repeat in her mind, mixing hope with the realistic understanding that some dreams were reserved for people born into different circumstances. For the next several days, Lily wrestled with whether to apply. She drafted poems in her spare moments, writing about working multiple jobs while classmates partied, about finding hope in borrowed books, about the democracy of literature that made beauty available to anyone willing to seek it. But each time she considered submitting her work, Madison's words echoed in her head about understanding their world, fitting their image. Meanwhile, Madison began crafting her application with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her right to success. Her portfolio featured technically proficient verses about alienation and post-structural analyses of symbolic meaning, poetry that sounded impressive but carried no authentic emotional weight. "This is just a formality," she told Chloe over expensive coffee. "The Fletcher family has been friends with our family for years. Simon Fletcher literally watched me grow up at charity galas. 1 week into the application period, Lily returned to the library for her evening volunteer shift, still undecided about submitting her portfolio. The poetry section drew her as always, and she found herself thinking about the stranger from the previous week, wondering if he'd found what he was looking for in Neruda's passionate verses. "Back again?" said a familiar voice. Lily turned to find the same man approaching the poetry shelves, but tonight something was different. He carried himself with more confidence. His clothes were pressed and professional, and there was an energy about him that suggested purpose rather than wandering. "Did the Neruda help?" she asked with genuine curiosity. "More than you know," he replied, pulling the slim volume from his jacket pocket. "I stayed up until 3 in the morning reading it, remembering why I fell in love with poetry in the first place. Sometimes we need reminders that beauty exists even when the world feels harsh." "Exactly." He studied her face with the same intensity she remembered. "I never properly introduced myself last week. I'm Simon." "Lily," she replied, though something in his manner suggested he already knew her name. "Lily, I have to ask, are you a student here? You seem to know literature in a way that goes beyond casual reading." "I'm in the literature program," she admitted, "though sometimes I wonder if I belong here." "Why would you say that?" Lily gestured subtly toward her thrift store clothes, her worn shoes. "Look around this place. Everyone else seems to know exactly where they fit. I'm just trying to keep up. Knowledge and insight have nothing to do with where you shop for clothes. You'd be surprised how much that matters to some people." Simon was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "What if I told you that the most successful people I know in publishing came from backgrounds exactly like yours? That authentic voices matter more than polished presentations? I'd say you're being kind but unrealistic. And what if I told you there was an opportunity coming that might prove you wrong?" Before Lily could ask what he meant, her supervisor called from the circulation desk about a computer malfunction requiring her immediate attention. By the time she'd resolved the technical issue and returned to the poetry section, Simon had disappeared, leaving behind only the lingering possibility that their conversation had meant more than casual encouragement. The following evening, Simon returned to the library one final time before the scholarship deadline. He found Lily in the poetry section, holding her worn copy of Maya Angelou's collected poems, the book that had been her constant companion since 7th grade. "That looks well loved," he observed, approaching with careful respect for her obvious connection to the volume. "It was a gift from my middle school librarian," Lily said, running her fingers along the familiar spine. "Miss Elena Grant. She gave it to me when I was going through a difficult time, said she had a feeling about me and wanted me to have my own copy to keep forever. It was the first new book I'd ever owned." Simon's face went completely still. His breath caught audibly, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. "Elena Grant?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. Do you know her? She was the kindest person. She always made sure I had the newest poetry collections to read when I was struggling after my parents divorced." Simon sat heavily in a nearby chair, his composure finally cracking. "Lily, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible." "What do you mean?" "Elena Grant was my wife. She died 3 years ago." The words hung in the air like something too large to comprehend. Lily stared at him, her mind racing to process this revelation that connected her past to her present in ways she'd never imagined. "Your wife?" She came home one day talking about a 7th grader who quoted Maya Angelou from memory during a library visit. She spent an hour choosing just the right words for the inscription. She said, "This girl has something special, Simon. Someday, she's going to be a real writer." Lily opened her treasured book to the inscription she'd read thousands of times. "For Lily, your voice matters. Let it sing. Elena Grant." "The Fletcher Grant Literary Scholarship exists because of Elena," Simon continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She believed that authentic voices from all backgrounds deserved support, not just those born into literary families. When she died, I created the scholarship in her memory to find exactly the kind of student she would have championed." "She saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself," Lily whispered, tears blurring her vision. "When you helped me find that Neruda collection, when you spoke about poetry saving you, I heard her voice again. I understood why she invested in you." Simon leaned forward, his eyes bright with purpose. "Lily, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you have to apply for the scholarship. Elena believed in your potential 8 years ago. I'm asking you to believe in it now." "But the other applicants have so many advantages." "Elena taught me that talent and authentic voice matter more than advantages. Your application won't just be evaluated on merit. It will be evaluated by someone who already knows you have exactly what we're looking for." That night, Lily sat in her tiny dorm room with her laptop open, finally understanding that her story was already part of something larger. She wrote from her heart about resilience, hope, and the transformative power of believing in someone's potential. She wrote about Elena Grant, the librarian who'd seen a writer before the writer knew she existed. Meanwhile, Madison submitted her technically polished but emotionally hollow portfolio, confident that family connections would triumph over mere talent. 2 weeks later, the literature department gathered for the scholarship announcement. Madison sat in the front row, practically glowing with anticipated victory. Lily waited in her usual back corner, clutching Elena's book like a talisman. "The Fletcher Grant Literary Group Scholarship recipient," Professor Martin announced, his voice carrying barely contained pride, "is Lily Scott." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's face went white as scattered applause filled the classroom, growing stronger as students began to understand what had just happened. "Furthermore," Professor Martin continued, "Miss Scott will begin her internship immediately, working directly with CEO Simon Fletcher on identifying new voices for publication." After the announcement, Madison approached Lily in the hallway, her usual confidence replaced by genuine confusion. "I don't understand how this happened," she said, her voice small and lost. "My mother's connections, my family's relationship with Fletcher Grant Literary Group." "Madison," Lily said gently, "I wrote about my life. You wrote about what you thought they wanted to hear." For the first time, Madison seemed to truly see her, not as a charity case or academic curiosity, but as someone who'd earned something Madison had assumed was hers by right. "Your poems," Madison said quietly. "In class, when you read them, they were real, weren't they? Not just academic exercises." "They were my life," Lily replied simply. "I never wrote about my life. I wrote about what I thought sounded sophisticated. It wasn't an apology, but it was recognition." That afternoon, Simon Fletcher waited in the library's poetry section with 2 cups of coffee and wearing a smile that transformed his entire face. "Congratulations," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Though I suspect Elena knew this day would come 8 years ago." I still can't believe it's real. Believe it. Your voice matters, Lily Scott. Elena saw it first, but now the world gets to hear it. As they walked together through the stacks where their story had begun, Lily held Elena's book close to her chest. The inscription felt warm under her fingers. 6 months later, when Lily's first poetry collection was published by Fletcher Grant Literary Group, she would dedicate it to Elena Grant, who saw the writer before I knew she existed, and to libraries everywhere that nurture voices waiting to be heard. But today, standing among the books that had saved her, she simply traced Elena's inscription with her fingertip and felt the weight of dreams finally taking shape.